I come from a modest background of rural setting, lower middle class family, and a vernacular medium education. As is the norm across Indian middle class families, academics was the only thing I was allowed to focus on during my childhood. Being a rebel that I was, I chose not to study at home and tried to explore other literature forms. And my father allowed me to read the periodicals available in our shop, provided I help him there. Thus began my journey of loving books that are not textbooks. And my father at that time was interested only in politics. So all I could read at that point of time during my childhood was only political magazines. I chose my field of graduation based on the advice I received from one of my seniors in village. He said, Raja, biochemistry, microbiology and biotechnology are the fields of future. Choose one of them. I ran those names in my mind, and somehow biotechnology sounded nice to me. That's how I chose to do my graduation in biotechnology without knowing anything about the subjects in it. Unfortunately, my hate for textbooks and love for other books held on to me firmly here. And it soon became apparent to me that I am not going to become the scientist that my father dreamt about. And from the day one I set my foot in Coimbatore to pursue my graduation, for me it was all about the acceptance and recognition from my peer group, which drove me towards books which were not accessible to me until then. So specifically, I had particular interest in specific books, especially biographies. Those books opened new dimension in my life. I always believed that biographies can give lessons equivalent to that of living for hundreds of years. Someone writes a biography, or someone writes an autobiography, or a biography is written about someone only because they have achieved something significant in their life. However, rather than looking at the success stories, I started to dutifully make notes of the mistakes they've committed in their life or any other blunders that they have confessed in those stories. My logic is very simple. They've become somebody or something really successful in their life despite committing those mistakes. Maybe those mistakes would have pulled their growth by few years down. If we ensure that we don't commit or repeat those same mistakes again in our own life, we might save few crucial years in our own development. So I started believing that books can teach us anything that we wanted to learn about mistakes and learning from mistakes itself. To an extent, the same can be said about business literature as well. We have plenty of books on best practices of companies. Whether it is the best practices of companies or success stories of individuals, both of these are highly dynamic, situational, and seasonal. And a successful triad for a particular company or for an individual may not yield the same success to us as well. For example, there were plenty of companies which were chronicled as best practiced companies, companies known for their moats and culture, innovation, and many other things in 1950s and 60s. How many of them are still surviving today? There had been quite a good number of companies which were chronicled as good, great, and colossal in 1980s and 1980s. How many of those companies are still retaining that tag? Maybe to an extent, we can now apply this to mistakes as well. However, avoiding the same mistakes committed by our forefathers and predecessors has been the cornerstone of the successful evolution, longevity, and sustainability of human race. While repeating a success story may or may not yield same amount of success to us, repeating the same blunders or mistakes committed by our seniors could lead to a fatal or collateral damage. Hence, in my opinion, avoiding mistakes is much more important than repeating success. However, do we have enough amount of literature on the business failures or the failures of people? I don't think so. A quick Google search on bestsellers on business success threw more than 8 million results in less than a second, whereas the corresponding number for bestsellers on business failures is less than 300K. This is a reasonable indication to assume that success garners much more attention, discussion, dissertation than business failures or personal failures. I began wondering what should be the reason for that. If avoiding failures is far more important, why do we not have so much literature on that topic? I could conceivably think of a couple of reasons for that. Whenever I read the fairy tales to my son, I was always asked to focus and emphasize on the happy endings and the positive outcomes of the book, rather than focusing more on the mistakes committed by some of the characters or the sufferings they had to go through because of those mistakes. Since our childhood, we are primed to focus more on the positive outcomes, and all the negatives and blunders were always being downplayed in our life. And by default, only successful people get to write autobiographies, or biographies are written only about successful people. And some of them may not be feeling comfortable enough to chronicle their own mistakes they've committed in their own life. When I realized this, I began to wonder what is the best source to learn about mistakes and how not to commit mistakes. While a business book or an autobiography may be a best source of inspiration, learning about mistakes and learning not to commit mistakes can best be learned from people in and around us who may be inspirational people in their own right. I always liken them to that of the legendary coaches we have in various sports. In sports, we have two different category of people. One, we have a legendary player. We also have a legendary coach. Usually, when a legendary player becomes a coach, he usually focuses more on the correct posture, footwork, technique, and how to do the things in the right way. Whereas someone who was good enough to play competitive sports, but he was not a legendary player himself becomes a coach, he usually ensures that his players are thought about avoiding the mistakes that he committed, which prevented him from becoming a legendary player, and ensure that most of his players or the team has become a best performing superstar team or a legendary players themselves. So in my opinion, our neighborhood experts, the ones whom I was talking about, the phenomenal individuals around us, are like these legendary coaches. Usually in sports, legendary coaches and legendary players are a mutually exclusive lot. Whether it is cricket, football, basketball, or many other sports, you have plenty of live examples of some of the legendary players miserably failing when it comes to coaching, whereas the legendary coaches never had successful stints in their national teams. So, in my opinion, these neighborhood coaches are as good as these legendary coaches. They'll be far more open to share the mistakes they have committed in their own life and ensure that we do not repeat those mistakes. And one more advantage of going with these neighborhood experts is the settings in which we live are almost the same. While an autobiography may be set in an alien environment, neighborhood expert shares all dynamics with us, whether it is the resources, culture, dynamics, stereotypes, opportunities, everything was same for him as like it for us. So there will be a perfect alignment between the advice that he gives and the suitability of the advice for our own development. While we may be left to interpret something written in an autobiography or may not be in a position to reach out to the author to clarify them, our neighborhood experts will always be available for any clarification that we wanted to have. And constant feedback is always possible to be had with the neighborhood experts for a continual improvement in our own life. When this dawned on me, it became my motto that whenever I get to meet someone inspirational, whenever I meet someone who I always look up to, I made it a point to always ask them, what are the mistakes you have committed in your life which you want me to avoid in my own life? I'm just going to give you a few of the such mistakes that some of those inspirational people asked me not to commit in my own life. So one of the mentors told me once that, come what may, do not quit your job within first 1 year, especially when you start your career. And then later one of the business gurus told me why it is a disastrous idea to compromise on your salary and move to an unrelated industry just for the sake of relocating close to your hometown. Then a mid-level manager once told me why it is a bad idea to remain a jack of all and not to focus on a specific thing beyond a point in your career. Very recently, a senior business leader told me, Raja, number crunching may be a cool thing to do. However, to reach the highest echelons of corporate world, you must always have sales experience and P&L responsibility. Coming out of the corporate world, one professor once told me, a beloved professor once told me, why not to postpone the marriage until you get settled, because you will never feel settled in your life. And then a wealthy uncle once told me why it is a bad idea to chase wealth by ignoring your child during their defining years, because whatever wealth you have amassed can easily be blown off by your kids, once they grow up without any responsibility. And finally, this wisdom from a banker who said why it is not the same as early 1990s to join as a probationary banker in a public sector bank in 2010. Most of these advices have immensely helped me. I have used them in my own experience, in my own life, and they have helped me immensely. Just a disclaimer here for the viewers, I would urge you to review each and every one of these advice and see the suitability of them for your own environment. And if I were to look back at my journey, odds were significantly stacked against me. I was not from the right background. I chose a wrong field to start my graduation. I never had interest to learn from textbooks. Back then, I could not properly read or write in English, the de facto medium of communication in college setup. And probably I might need a whole day to explain all the disadvantages I had or the mistakes that I had committed in my life. Despite all this, I could survive because of only one habit. Read and learn from anything and everything you can lay your hands on, and anyone and everyone you can meet in your lifetime. And learning is more like breathing. Most of the times we learn things unconsciously. Since our birth, we learn to walk, talk, and many more things. But very few of us walk the talk when it comes to effectively implementing what we have learned in our life. Learning is not just limited to academic books. There is significant amount of learning up for grabs in other books. Go and read that. There is infinite learning and wisdom stored in the people, neighborhood experts around us. Ask for it from them. You'll never regret that once in your lifetime. Thank you.